I'll start with the thing that still gets me, because it's the detail that explains everything else. When I was 19 and our dad's insurance money came through, Wyatt was the executor. He was 27, married to Melissa, already had the house. I had nothing but a job at the tire place and half of what our father left us. Wyatt took control of managing my share until I was responsible enough. And in the meantime, he told me I could stay with them. Generous, right? Except staying with them meant the garage, not a converted garage. The actual garage, with the water heater and Melissa's exercise bike and a space heater I bought myself at the hardware store because he wouldn't run a line out there. For people asking why I let it happen, I didn't have anywhere else to go, and Wyatt was good at making it sound reasonable. He'd say the guest room was for Melissa's mother when she visited, that I was lucky to have family who'd take me in at all, that Dad would have wanted us to look out for each other, and this was looking out for me. He said it so many times that for a while I believed the problem was me, that I was ungrateful. Our mom, Stephanie, backed him up every single time, because Wyatt was always the golden one and I was the accident she had at 41 that reshuffled her whole life. She'd tell me your brother's doing you a kindness. Don't make it into something. Here's the part that matters for later. Wyatt wasn't dumb about it. He was careful. He treated me exactly well enough that I could never point to one specific thing and call it abuse. I ate dinner at their table. I had a key, but I slept 40 feet from a heated house in a room that smelled like gasoline, and he'd host his friends in the living room and introduce me as his little brother who's getting back on his feet, while I was on my feet fine and just wasn't allowed inside them. The money is where it turned from unfair into something I couldn't forgive. When I turned 21 and asked for my share, Wyatt told me it was tied up. Then it was not a good time to pull it out. Then he sat me down and explained, like he was doing me a favor, that he'd used a chunk of it toward their kitchen remodel and the down payment on Melissa's Lexus, because the family needed a reliable car and I was living rent-free, so it evened out. He decided on his own that my father's money was payment for the garage he stuck me in. I remember standing in that kitchen, the one my dead father partly paid for, while he told me to be grateful I got a roof at all. I want to be clear about something because this is the whole point of the post. I didn't cry and move on. I didn't have some healing journey. I left, I got a place with 2 roommates across town, and I got angry in a way that never actually went away. It settled into a plan. I was 21 and I decided that whatever I did with my life from then on, I was going to end up in a position where Wyatt needed something from me, and I got to decide what he deserved. People say living well is the best revenge. I never believed that. Living well is just the setup. So here's the years later part, and I promise it connects. I spent my 20s working. I stayed in the trades, got my own thing going, saved, like someone with a grudge, which I was. Wyatt and I stayed in contact, the way you do when your mother forces it. I showed up to Christmas because Stephanie would guilt me for a month if I didn't. Sat there while Wyatt talked about his renovations and Melissa showed off whatever was new. He never once acknowledged the money. In his head it was settled. He genuinely believed he'd been generous to me. That's the reason he treated me the way he did, and I need you to understand it isn't a mystery. Wyatt grew up being told he was the capable one, the one who'd carry the family, and somewhere in there he decided that made everything he took his by right. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a guy who thought he was the responsible adult managing his irresponsible kid brother. And that story let him do anything. What I knew that he didn't know I knew was that Wyatt had a problem. It started as sports betting on his phone, the same as half the guys I work around. Over about 3 years, it stopped being a hobby. I picked up on it slowly, Melissa mentioning at a family dinner that they'd refinanced for a project when there was no project. Wyatt asking to borrow $4,000 off ME in the spring of 2022, just to cover a gap, which, given our history, was almost funny. I didn't lend it. I told him I was tapped out, which was a lie, and I watched. By the middle of 2023, it was bad in a way even Stephanie couldn't spin. Melissa moved out. I'll get into that because how it happened matters and I don't want to dump it all in one part. Wyatt was behind on the house that partly belonged to me and my dad's memory, that he'd made me sleep beside like a lawnmower. And that's when the piece I'd been waiting on for almost 10 years actually came into range, because I was in a position to do something about that house, and Wyatt had no idea I'd been positioned and ready the whole time. I'm going to stop here for part 1 because the next part is Melissa leaving, Travis, my closest friend, who has his own history with Wyatt that I'll explain, and how the house came onto the market, and I want to get it right instead of rushing it. I guess my question for anyone reading is whether wanting this for 10 years makes me as bad as him. Because I don't feel bad. I feel ready. Update 1. A lot of you asked about Melissa, and honestly her leaving is where the ground under Wyatt actually started to go. So let me back up and do it properly. Melissa was never cruel to me the way Wyatt was. That's the thing I keep landing on. When I lived in that garage, she was the one who'd bring a plate out if Wyatt forgot I was out there, who once told him in front of me that it wasn't right, that I was his brother and not a boarder. He shut that down fast. Told her I preferred the space, that I was weird about being underfoot, that she didn't understand our family, and she let it go, because Wyatt had a way of making you feel like you were the one being unreasonable for noticing something was wrong. She wasn't a hero. She looked away for years because looking away was comfortable and the Lexus was nice. But she wasn't the architect of it either, and I've tried to be fair about that even when I'm furious about everything else. What broke them wasn't me, and it wasn't one blow-up. It was the slow version. By 2022, the betting had eaten into everything. And the thing about Wyatt is he could not, physically could not, admit he'd made a mistake. So instead of telling Melissa they were in trouble, he managed her the same way he managed me. Half-truths, redirections, telling her the refinance was for a project, telling her the credit card was maxed because of timing. She's not stupid. She started asking harder questions, and I know this because Stephanie couldn't keep her mouth shut at family stuff and would sigh about how Melissa was hounding Wyatt over money. Like a wife asking where the money went was the character flaw in the room. The actual end of it, from what Melissa told me later, and I'll get to how I ended up talking to Melissa, because that matters and I don't want anyone thinking it was some soap opera thing, was a fight that went on for basically a whole weekend in the spring of 2023. She found out he'd borrowed against the house without really walking her through what that meant, and when she confronted him, he did the Wyatt thing. He didn't apologize. He went on offense. He told her she'd spent plenty, that the lifestyle was as much hers as his, that if she'd been more supportive instead of keeping score, he wouldn't have had to hide anything. He made his gambling her fault. He told her she was ungrateful for the life he'd built. The exact word, ungrateful, the same one he used on me for a decade. When she told me that later, I actually laughed. Because of course it was the same word. It was always the same word. Ungrateful was Wyatt's word for anyone who wanted him to be accountable for something. She moved out that summer, went to stay with her sister Aileen across town. Aileen never liked Wyatt, thought he was a show-off from day one, and had been telling Melissa for years she could do better. So there was somewhere for her to land. No kids, thank God, so it was clean in that sense. Wyatt told the family Melissa walked out on him when he was down, and Stephanie ate it up, called Melissa disloyal, said in front of me at a birthday thing that a real wife stands by her husband. I sat there and said nothing, because I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother about Wyatt is like arguing with a wall about the color of paint. She decided who Wyatt was in 1990-something, and nothing he does will ever move her off it. Now, how I ended up actually close to Melissa, since I keep promising to explain it, and I don't want it to read like a coincidence because it wasn't. My best friend is Travis. Travis and I have known each other since the tire shop days, before any of this. And Travis knew the whole garage story, knew about the money, knew all of it, because he's the one who helped me move my stuff out of Wyatt's garage when I finally left at 21. So Travis is not a new character parachuting in. He's been standing next to me this entire time. And he's got his own reasons to have no love for Wyatt. Because back when we were young, Wyatt talked Travis into investing in some sure-thing parlay nonsense and stiffed him on paying it back. Small money, but it told Travis everything about who Wyatt was. Here's the connection. Aileen, Melissa's sister, dated a buddy of Travis's for a couple years. So there was already a loose thread between our circles. Not close, just the way people in the same town orbit each other. After Melissa left Wyatt, she was around Aileen's place. Aileen's world overlapped a little with Travis's, and at a cookout that summer, Melissa and I actually talked for the first time as two adults instead of as her husband's kid brother and the guy in the garage, and she apologized to me. Unprompted. She said she'd thought about the garage thing a lot since everything fell apart, that she saw now what she'd let herself not see, that she was sorry she went along with him telling everyone I preferred it out there. I didn't fully forgive her. I don't hand that out, but I respected that she said it to my face, which is more than Wyatt has ever done in his life. So that's the human map of it. Melissa and I on decent terms. Travis, my closest friend, with his own history of being burned by Wyatt. Aileen loathing Wyatt from the start. And Wyatt himself, alone in the house now, blaming everyone but himself, still telling the family he was the wronged party. Then, the house. By late 2023, Wyatt was drowning on it. I knew because he came to me again. Third time in his life asking me for money, and the pattern of that alone tells you who he is. He sat in my truck in the parking lot after a family dinner and did this whole thing about how we're brothers, how blood is blood, how dad would want us to help each other. He needed a chunk of money to get current on the house or The bank was going to move on it, and he framed it, I swear to you, as an opportunity for me, that I could help the family and he'd make it right. He never once connected the fact that the money he wanted help protecting was sitting in a house he bought partly with my inheritance, the same house he made me sleep beside like I was storage. I told him I'd think about it. That's all. I didn't say no. I didn't lecture him. I didn't bring up the garage or dad's money or any of the 10 years I'd spent thinking about exactly this. Because here's what I'd figured out and he hadn't. A guy that far behind, that proud, that unwilling to tell anyone the real numbers, he wasn't going to get current. He was going to lose that house one way or another. The only open question was who'd be standing there when it happened. And I'd spent nearly 10 years making sure I could be the one standing there. I'm going to stop part 2 here because the next part is what I actually did about the house, how Wyatt reacted when he found out, and the conversation where he begged me and I let him. And I want to lay that out carefully instead of cramming it. There's also the thing with Travis and Melissa that I haven't told you yet, and I know some of you already see it coming. But I want to be honest that, at the time, I did not. Question for the thread. Same as before. Am I a bad person for having been ready for this? Because Wyatt sat in my truck asking me to save the house, and all I felt was that everything was finally lining up the way I'd wanted it to. Update 2. Okay, this is the part a lot of you have been waiting for, and I want to walk through it honestly because some of you are going to think I did something shady and I didn't. I didn't need to. That's the thing about Wyatt. He built the trap himself and spent a decade daring people to be as ruthless as he was. I just finally was. So, late 2023, Wyatt's behind on the house. He's asked me for money in my truck. I've told him I'll think about it. What I actually did was the opposite of lend him money. And here's the reasoning, because it matters. If I'd given Wyatt cash, it would have disappeared into the same hole everything else went into, and 6 months later he'd be behind again and I'd have nothing to show but a lighter bank account, and his contempt. Because Wyatt never respected anyone who helped him. He saw help as something owed to him. So being generous just marked you as a sucker. I knew that about him the way you know your own address. So I wasn't going to hand him a thing. Instead, I let it play out. The bank started the process on the house that winter. I'd been ready for a version of this for years. I'd kept my credit clean, kept cash liquid, kept talking to a mortgage guy I trust, because somewhere in the back of my head I always figured Wyatt's whole shiny life was one bad stretch away from cracking, and I wanted to be the one holding the pieces when it did. When the house came up, I was in a position to move on it, and I did. Not through some scheme. I bought it the boring, legal, grown-up way, cash-heavy offer, financing lined up in advance, no contingencies to slow me down. The kind of clean offer that wins. I'd spent 10 years making sure that when this exact door opened, I could walk through it without hesitating, and I did. Now here's where it gets human. Because buying a building is just paperwork. What I actually wanted was for Wyatt to know. I didn't tell him. I let him find out, and the way he found out is that I had my name on everything, and eventually that surfaces. He called me the second he pieced it together, and this call went on for over an hour. I'm going to try to give you the real shape of it because it's the most honest conversation Wyatt and I have ever had, which isn't saying much. He started friendly, relieved even. Like, thank God it's you, it stays in the family, we can work this out, you'll let me stay, we'll figure out payments, brothers helping brothers. He genuinely, at first, thought I'd bought it to rescue him. That's how deep his belief runs that the world exists to catch him. And I let him talk, let him get all the way out onto that limb, before I told him that no, I bought it because it was a good property at a good price, and I intended to keep it, and that if he wanted to stay, he'd be a tenant like anyone else. That's when the friendly evaporated. He went to the history. He brought up Dad, said Dad would be ashamed of me for turning on my own brother, and I finally, after 10 years, said the thing back. I told him Dad's money was in the walls of that house. I told him he'd spent my inheritance on a kitchen and a Lexus, and then made me sleep next to the water heater and called it a kindness, and that I'd thought about it every single day since, and that he didn't get to bring up Dad to me. Ever. He didn't even flinch at the inheritance part. That's what tells you everything. He just pivoted, said I was rewriting history, that he'd taken me in when I had nowhere, that the garage was temporary and I was making it into a grievance because I've always been jealous of him. Jealous. Of him. He actually said that people like me can't stand to see people like him succeed. That this was me finally getting my little revenge because I never made anything of myself. I let him believe that if he wanted. I've stopped needing Wyatt to understand me. What I needed was the deed, and I had it. Then he asked, and this is the part where I want your honest read. He asked if he could stay. He had nowhere to go. Melissa was at Aileen's. Stephanie's place is small, and she and Wyatt at close quarters would be a disaster, and they both knew it. And he was broke. He asked to stay in his own house as my tenant. And I said yes. but not the house. I told him the house was going to be rented out to actual paying tenants because that's the whole point of owning it, but that there was a space he could have. Cheap. While he got back on his feet. The garage. I want to be clear, I didn't announce it like some big cinematic gotcha. I said it flat, like it was just the practical option. Because it was the practical option. It was the cheapest thing I had, and he had no money, so on paper it made total sense. And that's what made it land. He didn't even get it at first. He was quiet. Then he said the garage, and I said, yes, the garage. I'll put a proper heater out there. It's more than you gave me. And he laughed, this ugly little laugh, and said I was unbelievable, that I'd been waiting years to do this to him. And I told him the truth. I said, yes, I have. He took it. That's the thing people don't believe when I tell this story. He actually took it, because he had no other move. And because I think some small part of Wyatt understood the math of it and even respected it. Since respect for leverage is the only kind of respect Wyatt has ever had. He moved into the garage of the house he used to lord over, in the spring of 2024, with his stuff in the same corner where my space heater used to be. Now, the complications. Because it wasn't clean, and I don't want to pretend it was. First, Stephanie. When my mother found out, she called me and we had the worst conversation we've ever had. And that's a high bar. She told me I'd humiliated my brother, that I was heartless, that no decent son does this to family. I asked her where she was when I was 19 in that same garage. She said that was different. I asked how. She couldn't tell me how. She just kept saying it was different because Wyatt was the older one. He was the one who was supposed to lead the family, and I had thrown that in his face. And there it was. The actual reason, out loud, after 30 years. In her head, Wyatt was owed things I wasn't, by birth order, by whatever. And me having power over him broke a rule that to her was more real than fairness. We barely speak now. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't sit heavy, because she's my mother. But I'm also done setting myself on fire to keep Wyatt warm and her comfortable. Second complication, and this is the one I genuinely didn't see coming at the time even though half of you called it in the part 2 comments. Travis. My best friend Travis and Melissa. Somewhere across that year of cookouts and overlapping circles in Aileen's place, the two of them got close. And by the time Wyatt was moving his stuff into the garage, Travis and Melissa were together. A real thing, not a fling. And I had put Wyatt in a garage with a window that looks out on the driveway. The driveway where, before long, he'd be watching my best friend pick up his ex-wife. I did not plan that part. I want to say that plainly. I planned the house. I did not plan that the view from that garage would include the one thing that would cut Wyatt deeper than losing the house ever could. I'm going to stop here, because part 4 is where it all actually collides. The first time Wyatt saw them together, what he did about it, the blow-up with Stephanie and the rest of the family, and where every single one of us stands now. That's the ending, and I want to give it the room it needs. So tell me straight, before I post the last part, the man put me in that garage at 19 and called it generosity. Am I wrong that he doesn't get to be surprised he's out there now? Final update. So this is the last part. Thanks to everyone who stuck through the whole thing. A lot of you had strong opinions about whether I'm the villain here, and I've read all of them, and I'll give you my honest answer at the end. First, what actually happened. Wyatt moved into the garage in spring 2024. For a while, it was quiet in the way that just means everyone's avoiding the obvious. He paid me the cheap rent. Small, but I made him pay it, because free would have let him keep the story that I owed him something, and I was done funding that story. He'd come and go, we barely talked, and the paying tenants in the main house had no idea the guy in the garage used to own the place. The thing with Travis and Melissa I did not orchestrate, and I need people to hear that because the comments keep framing me like a puppet master. I put Wyatt in a garage. I did not arrange for the woman he drove out of his life to fall for my best friend and start getting picked up in that driveway. That happened on its own because Melissa and Travis are two actual people who found something real, and the geography of it was just brutal luck for Wyatt. The first time he saw them was early summer. Travis pulled up to grab Melissa. They were headed somewhere. She'd left something at the house she was collecting, and Wyatt was out by the garage. I wasn't there. I got this from Melissa and Travis both, and their versions matched, so I trust it. Wyatt didn't explode. That's not his style. He did the Wyatt thing where he acts like he's above it. He made a comment to Travis about loyalty, about how Travis was supposed to be family's friend, about how it was pathetic to take a man's wife after he's down. Travis, who never forgot Wyatt stiffing him years back, didn't take the bait, just told him Melissa wasn't his wife anymore and hadn't been for a long time and got in the car. And Melissa, who spent years being told by Wyatt that she didn't understand things, looked at him standing in the doorway of that garage and told him the one thing that I think actually got through, that this The garage, all of it, was the exact life he built, and he built it by treating people like they were lucky to get scraps from him. And now he had scraps. Then it got worse for him, and this is where the family finally detonated. Wyatt called Stephanie and spun it the way he spins everything. That I'd humiliated him on purpose. That I'd put him in the garage specifically so he'd have to watch Melissa parade around with my best friend. That the whole thing was a decade-long revenge plot I'd been running. And here's the thing. He wasn't entirely wrong. The house part was a plan. I told you that from the first line of the first post. So when Stephanie called me furious, demanding I admit I'd done this to torture him, I didn't deny the part that was true. I told her yes, I bought the house on purpose. Yes, I'd been ready for years, but that I did not set up Travis and Melissa. That reality did that. And that if watching his ex move on was agony for him, maybe he should have thought about who he was before he ran out of people willing to stand in a driveway for him. That call turned into the whole family picking sides, and it went on for weeks. Actual weeks of phone calls and a couple of ugly in-person blow-ups. Stephanie went all in on Wyatt, of course. But here's what surprised me. Not everyone did. An aunt and a couple cousins who'd watched the garage situation back when I was 19 and never said anything at the time finally said something now. That they'd always known it was wrong. That Wyatt got away with it because Stephanie let him. And that they weren't going to pretend I was the monster for the crime of finally having the upper hand. Stephanie couldn't stand that. The story she'd protected her whole life, Wyatt the capable golden son, me the ungrateful accident, was coming apart in front of the family, and she fought it hard, kept insisting I was cruel, kept saying a good brother forgives. I asked her, in front of people this time, why the forgiving was always supposed to run one direction. She didn't have an answer. She just kept repeating that Wyatt was the older one, like that was a law of physics. That's the real reason all of this happened, by the way, and I finally understand it fully. Wyatt treated me the way he did because he was raised to believe he was owed the top spot in the family, and everyone else existed to support it. Stephanie built him that way from birth, and he lived his whole life inside it. The money, the house, the garage, the way he talked to Melissa, all of it came from the same root belief that he was the main character, and the rest of us were furniture. It was never personal cruelty exactly. It was worse than that. It was that he never once considered me a person whose turn could ever come. Well, it came, where everyone is now. Wyatt eventually moved out of the garage that fall, got a room with an old friend from his betting days, which, fine, not my problem. He didn't leave with any grand speech. The last real conversation we had, he tried one more time to make it my fault. Told me I'd let jealousy eat me alive, that I'd traded my family for a building. I told him I didn't trade anything. He spent my inheritance and my dignity, and I simply collected on a debt he pretended didn't exist. He said we were done as brothers. I told him we'd been done since I was 19 sleeping next to his water heater. He just hadn't noticed because he'd never looked out there. That was it. We don't talk. Travis and Melissa are still together and honestly seem good. And yeah, it's strange, and no, I don't find it strange enough to lose my best friend over. Melissa and I aren't close, but we're square. And square is more than I ever expected from that direction. Stephanie and I are basically done. That's the piece that isn't clean and never will be. She chose the son she'd always chosen, right to the end. And I've stopped waiting for her to choose differently because a person doesn't rewrite 30 years at 70-something. I don't feel at peace about my mother. I feel clear about her, which is different. And me? I still own the house. I rent it out. Sometimes I drive past it and I look at that garage, and I don't feel triumphant exactly, but I don't feel guilty either. People in the comments keep wanting me to say, I regret it. That revenge is empty, that I should have taken the high road. I don't, and I won't. The high road was available to Wyatt for 10 years, and he never took it once. So to answer the question I kept asking every part, no, I don't think he gets to be surprised. He put his brother in that garage and called it generosity. I put him in the same garage and called it rent. He's the one who taught me the difference doesn't matter to the guy who's out there, only to the guy who owns the house.